everyone, welcome back. I know the stage is filling slowly always, but we start with our next talk. Our next speaker is right next to me, Jutta Horstmann. She is MD, CTO, and COO at the Cologne-based company eyeo. And if you do not know eyeo as a brand, you might know AdBlock Plus. I think that's your biggest product, right?
That's true, but now you totally cut off my intro to my talk. But now everybody knows, and that's fine as well. So
it changes. And Jutta will talk about from startup to grown-up, the pleasures and pitfalls of scaling an industry disruptor. Please warmly welcome Jutta Horstmann.
Thanks so much.
Enjoy.
Thank you. So, right, I want to take you on a trip through 10 years of our experiences at eyeo, for scaling from startup to grown-up, and share with you some of our experiences, where we failed and what we learned along the way. So, as mentioned, she was killing my intro because I just wanted to see who knows about eyeo at all. And still, let me give me a short raise of hands. So who in this audience now is using currently an ad blocker in your browser? Awesome. So based on that, I assume that you know one or two of our major products, like, for example, AdBlock Plus or AdBlock. Both are not only the most popular ad blockers globally, but also the most used browser extensions. And beyond these products that we own, today you also find our technology in a lot of different mobile browsers, but I will come to this a bit later. So when you're using an ad blocker, you are definitely not alone. You see that there is a big ad blocking distribution worldwide, and this is what we used to call the biggest boycott in history. So why is that the case? The problem here is that the online ecosystem, it is basically broken. And this is because first, users in general see too many and way too intrusive ads. They are flooded by that. And this also means that advertisers just can't stand out anymore. And they need to move into even more aggressive formats. So this starts a vicious cycle, which also affects the publishers in the end, who overall earn less and have to accept and allow more aggressive ads on their online assets. So what can we do about this? This year now sees the 10th anniversary of an idea that was able to turn this vicious cycle, in fact, into a virtuous cycle. And this is what we call acceptable ads and the acceptable ads standard. So this works by putting the user in control of their online experiences. They can opt in to see only acceptable, meaning non-intrusive and non-annoying ads, on only very few of them. Based on that, there is a big incentive for advertisers to run only user-friendly ads, and with that also a general cap on ads, which is defined in the acceptable ads standard. This makes the ads more valuable to the publishers. So over the past 10 years, it has proven that based on this idea, we were able to develop a pretty sustainable business model. And this meant that we are nowadays implementing solutions who empower this balanced and sustainable online value exchange, and not only for the users with like AdBlock Plus and other ad blocking technologies, including with the acceptable ad standard, providing the fair value exchange for the providers, but now extending this also to advertiser-facing like Crumbs and Trestle. And we'll come to these a bit later. So I think what you see here is that we go way beyond just ad filtering. Our overall vision here is that we want to put you, meaning all of the stakeholders in the online ecosystem, in control of a fair and prosperous internet. Now, over the last 10 years, this strategy provided for pretty good growth. So we went from 2 to 14 products. We went from 16 to nowadays 220 million users worldwide. We went from 6 to 250 people. And these come not from 3 nationalities anymore, but from 35. We also extended our Acceptable Ads program from only 1 to nowadays 700 partners, both profitable and non-profit. And because the legality of ad blocking was questioned a couple of times, we moved from 0 to 8 lawsuits to defend that ad filtering is in fact legal, and we won all of them. Now, growth is great, because growth means that you created something that people in fact need. But it also means that you start outgrowing existing structures and business models. And this means that what worked yesterday might be dysfunctional today, and the startup needs to scale. So when we are looking at scaling now, and this is what I want to walk you through, is 4 major areas, I think. Scaling the business, scaling the product portfolio, scaling the organization, and scaling the culture. And I think with all of these, you need to have a pretty good approach with a clear vision and strategy about growing and scaling your company. For us, this means that the first important thing is focus. We want to create focus because this helps us to build the right thing and to build it fast. The next very important thing here for us is alignment, because we can only achieve our very ambitious goals when we work together in a collaborative fashion across the whole company. And last but definitely not least, we want to make sure that people who work for us love what they do and that they really enjoy their work. Now, let me start with some thoughts on scaling the business. So at eyeo, we are looking in 2 areas there. One is expansion, and one is focus. Both might sound a bit contradictory here, but let me expand a bit on this. Expansion means that we want to put our ad blocking technology on any devices and platforms that the users might be using. And because where the users are moving to, the ads are following, we are also looking into, on these platforms, how can we ensure a valuable, a sustainable online value exchange there as well, both for the publishers as well as the advertisers. So how do we approach this expansion? We look at this with regular market research, product discovery for sure, also continuous exploration in these fields. And we not only do this in our business units, but we set up a dedicated organizational entity for this, which we call the eyeo Lab. But we also know that we don't need to build everything ourselves. So this is why expansion for us also works with M&A, like us acquiring Flutter, a payment solution, a couple of years ago, to make sure that we are able to address this area of the online ecosystem as well. The next important thing about business growth strategy for us is, again, focus. Because expansion might lead to the fact that you completely dilute what you're doing, that you're losing the focus on your core business and are just busy with diversifying. So this is why we also all of the time see that we can make sure that our organization has a clear and dedicated vision, mission, and also scope. Which means that what we did was to create the eyeo Group, a kind of a holding to make sure that every part has their own organization, so that eyeo itself can focus on the B2B business, and we moved our customer product to our B2C subsidiary, which is called AdBlock Inc. Now, let's look a bit more in detail on this expansion and focusing topic with the example of our ad filtering technology. So there, as mentioned before, we started with our own products like AdBlock Plus as a browser extension, and then we expanded that in our business growth strategy to now that we are able to provide our distribution partners by integrating our technology in their products. This approach proved to be pretty successful, and this then was when we went all in with this B2B strategy and went into a focus mode again. So because B2B was successful, as said, we moved out our B2C business in its own subsidiary, which then enabled us to go back into expansion mode again, because now we want to see how can we diversify beyond the browser and also see where is the market going, what are the users' needs. Privacy nowadays is a major topic, so this is also where we are looking into how can we diversify beyond ad filtering. Now, I touched upon a couple of our products already, so let's look a bit more into product growth strategy. So I think one important topic here to keep in mind is when you look at your online behavior, you might recognize that in the past you consumed content on your desktop browser. But this is not the case nowadays. You're using your mobile devices to consume any kind of content that you might want to see. So this again is an example for where the users are going, the ads are going as well, and we, with our ad filtering technology, need to be very aware of that and follow on that. The other thing here is like we approached that problem of people moving from desktop to mobile first, for sure, with creating our own mobile product, the AdBlock browser. But I think if you look at which apps you're using mainly for browsing the web, most of the people rather tend to stick with the major browsers or with the pre-installed ones. It is hard to get a niche browser with a very specific functionality in front of the user. So this is why we, in the end, shifted and pivoted towards integrating our ad filtering technology into other browser providers' products. So now we are creating SDK, software development kits, that can be used in a vast variety of different browser technologies. And this proved to be a pretty successful product growth strategy. And what we are currently seeing is that already nowadays we have around 40% of our overall users already on mobile devices using the products of our distribution partners. So beyond this kind of expansion, like partnering with the distribution partners, browser providers, we have a second approach for our product growth strategy, and this is diversifying our offerings. So we started with addressing two major stakeholders in the online ecosystem, which is the users, and we provide ad filtering technology to them. And on the other hand, it is the publishers and ad networks, where with the Acceptable Ads program, we are able to provide for the sustainable value exchange online and make sure that they are able to engage with the ad filtering audience. We expanded on this specific user audience by also creating a supply-side solution, the Acceptable Ads Exchange, which we then moved into its own subsidiary AAX as well. And also Flatter, as mentioned before, is another offering for publishers. So over the time, these were like product diversifications that we approached. And nowadays, we also provide solutions for the advertiser side, mainly Trestle, a demand-side platform, and Crumbs, which is our privacy-friendly user-targeting product for the post-cookie world. Now, let me highlight one thing when we are talking about business and product growth strategy. There are people involved, and people who are quite attached to what you did in the past, and probably not so much to what you're now pivoting to. So you can be widely successful with scaling your business and products, but it is really very important to check in regularly with your organization, with your people, to see what this growth is doing to them. So for us at eyeo, the shift from B2C to B2B, so from building our own products that directly are used by the end user, to building SDKs, which then are integrated in the products of our partners. This made a major shift for people at eyeo. So, like simply put, it is just easier to be proud of a product that users love than like of an SDK which is implemented in other people's products. So I think it is important for all of these changes to not forget about the human aspect of these. So let's start looking a bit more into these human aspects. And let me start with scaling the organization. So the learnings that I want to share here are in three major areas. I would like to talk a bit about structure. I would like to talk about scaling process. And I would like to talk about goal setting at scale. So on our side, with growing headcount and also focus on new areas of business and product, we had over the time to adapt our organizational design accordingly. And what you see here in a bit of a timeline is that we moved from like just loosely coupled project teams to, in the end, what we are currently seeing, a divisional business unit focused setup. So let me explain this a bit more in detail. And first, let's look back at like the good startup days. So it's just a small group of people, and they pick whatever they would like to work on, and they are highly engaged. You don't need any like structure or processes to keep them motivated and focused on building awesome things. But as said before, with success comes growth, and you need more experts, you need more specialists, and the headcount grows, and you start thinking about how to approach this. So what we did is first we identified what all of these people were working on, we were clustering this a bit, and then we created project teams. So in reality, it looks a bit more like this. Or in the end, at us, and this is something that we created based on our like what people were working on. It looked like that in our case. The next thing about growth in the organization was that we identified that project teams are not sufficient. We need experienced people who are able to hire and develop people in the specific professions. So we looked into setting up a functional setup with functional departments and created just a simple matrix. So the functional departments were allocating people to the cross-functional teams. So our org chart turned into this. And then we grew even more, and this affected that the department heads that we set up just had too many direct reports. And also our teams grew beyond the standard two pizza rule, and they like spawned like crazy. And this meant that a lot of alignment started to lack. So the first thing that we did was just functional scaling. So we stayed in the pattern and made sure that the headcount per department head was decreasing. But this did not help us with creating focus and alignment on our business goals, which is why we took the next step, and this is divisional scaling. So we created this divisional structure, making sure that we have specific business entities which focus on the three pillars of our business model, which is building, monetizing, and distributing ad filtering technology. Under the hood, what you see here is the good old Spotify model for scaling agile. We adapted that to our needs, and it worked quite well. Definitely not perfect, but overall, the first rule of organizational design is just that all organizational designs are bad. And this is, I think, a major learning because it enables you to go a bit wild, go experimental, and keep on iterating on your organizational design, which is what we do. We iterate on organizational design like we do on our products. So when you are evolving organizational design, I think it is important that you make up your mind what could be the main organizational criteria that you always want to improve for. And for us, it is customer focus. We're not completely there yet with the divisional structure that I showed you, so there is more to come in terms of organizational evolution. Also, another thing that needs to be continuously fine-tuned and improved is optimizing for speed and efficiency. And the last thing is autonomy and ownership of teams and organizational entities. So these are our main organizational design criteria. Your mileage may vary, but it's important to make up your mind what it is that you want to optimize for. Now, after structure, let's look a bit into scaling process. So I think there are two very important areas here, at least in our journey from startup to grown-up. And the first topic is professionalization. So I think probably it's only us, but I think this affects a lot of startups. It is the not invented here phenomenon. You really want to make your things yourself. You want to build your own tools. You want to build your own processes. And this is great at the beginning, but it doesn't scale. And what we shifted towards was just learning from best industry practices and adopting those, and for sure also adopting them to our needs. So like Agile, which we wrote out to the company without any specific methodology in mind, but making sure that people have this Agile mindset. Besides processes, I think tooling is also very important, also going for industry best practices there. So we had a whole slew of different tools for specific applications, like for tracking work, for documenting our work and such. And we moved all of this to like industry standard tooling, also in around people ops or finance or in our software development processes. The next topic here is automation. I think when you say automation, you always see everybody nodding. Automation is important. Yes, yes, yada, yada. It is important for speed and for sure for decreasing human error, but it's also important when you're scaling, because scaling your business then does not necessarily mean that you need to have to scale headcount, which comes with a whole entity of new problems. But you can just become more efficient by automating your processes, and this might relieve you from some of these headcount growth pains. An important point here, though, is to avoid creating processes just for the sake of it. People will feel that this creates bureaucracy. And this is something that in our change processes, a lot of people felt very concerned about, is that we would now put process over people. So this is something that you need to be aware of and be able to handle quite well, and be sure that you are optimizing for the right things. So in our case, where we want to put process over people is where we are able to standardize routine workflows, because this in the end, it will enable people and provide them with more space and time for nurturing their creativity. The other area where I think process is really important is where it is putting process over you need to know who to ask. Because this is also something that gets tracked with the organization from the good old startup times, that if you have a good relationships and network in the company, you are able to get anything done. But if you don't have this, because the company is growing and you are a new hire, things get really, really slow. So having a put a good process in that place enables also new starters in the company to navigate tasks quite easily instead of having to know who to ask and to get help. Now, the third pillar of scaling the organization is goal setting. And very briefly here, what we wanted to achieve with finding a good goal setting process, and we tried a lot. There was a lot of trial and error over the last 10 years in terms of how to approach goal setting to create alignment and focus in the organization. And we had a couple of requirements for that. We wanted to make sure that it enables goal setting from top to down and also from bottom up. We wanted to make sure that it allows for strategy co-creation, so that it's not only a very small group of people telling everybody else why we are doing things and what we want to focus on, what our priorities are, but that there is a larger group of people who is able to co-create that strategy. Like with everything we do, we want to have a process which supports us working iteratively throughout the whole year in implementing our strategy and incremental. And we wanted to be able to measure whether we succeed and to measure our progress. So based on these requirements, I assume that most people here won't be surprised on what we settled in the end. We are now working with OKRs, objectives and key results. We introduced this a year ago, and based on our learnings, I can definitely assure you that yes, this is a framework that is really easy to understand and really hard to implement. We are definitely not there yet, but we learned a lot along the way, and it is really definitely worthwhile the effort. This is something that I can already tell, because it really allows our organization to stay aligned and focused, and it met the requirements that we set here up front. Now, let's look into the fourth pillar of growth and scaling, here scaling culture. So we address that your headcount grows and your organization scales, but then the €1 million question is, will you be able to also scale your culture? Because culture is not something that you can control or force into being. You can nurture it, but in the end, you really need the whole organization to create it and then also to scale it. So let me share how we approach it at eyeo, and I think there were 4 things that were really important to us. The first thing is that you need to provide clarity. You need to provide clarity on everything when you go beyond 100 or then beyond 200 people. Because everything means clarity on goals, on strategy, on processes, on shared values and behavior, and everything that you expect from people to understand and comply with. In the startup times with a small headcount, this was not so important because culture just permeates the organization. But when you grow beyond 100 people, you definitely need to become more explicit. And what we did at eyeo was that we just started to write things down. We wrote down our leadership principles. We wrote down our core values. We wrote down our communication guidelines. And for sure made sure that we repeat the message again and again to reach each and everybody, also all of the new starters that come into our company regularly. One thing that we found was very helpful in getting the message across was storytelling. So when we introduced the leadership principles, we let our leaders tell small stories about that. When we introduced our core values, we made sure that nowadays we have the value of the month, and we asked people to share their personal story about that value. And also telling stories from the past, because it shows clear why we have the culture that we have at the company. And accompanying this with pictures and anecdotes and stuff, a lot of this we are doing currently in the year of our 10th anniversary. Embracing diversity for sure is really important, because when you grow, your diversity will grow, and we know how important diversity is for us, because it makes our teams stronger, it makes our decisions more balanced, and overall it leads to to better solutions. But also, diversity can slow us down because it requires a lot of empathy, a lot of alignment, a lot of communication. So in the end, we try to be as inclusive as possible, as long as this does not work against our values and also our business goals. The last thing that I want to address here is that it is important to break silos to scale culture, because people tend to move into silos. It is something that is reducing complexity, and it is providing for like subcultures. You're with people you trust, people you know. Everything is decreasing a bit. So what we do to work against silos is that we get people together in cross-company events, both in person as well as remote, like in a remote open space. And each and every week we meet virtually in all-hands meetings, or what we call our Thursday Thoughts. Also something like communities of practice, like professional groups in a company who work together cross-company, is something that I can really recommend to implement. Now, let me close this briefly by sharing with you our updated core values, again, something that we iterated on. And I think these are the right ones to scale our business, to build on. And they were also not created with a top-down process, but we set up what we called a culture council for this, to developing them and make sure that they resonate with the rest of the company. So last question, I think that is a bit tricky. You might be able to scale business, product, organization, and culture, but can you scale people? Is it something that we can request from people? So what we are all looking for is something like a growth mindset, but this is also not something that is in each and everybody. So you need to look into your old guard and check with them regularly to see whether they are still feeling at home in the now new and changed company. If not, try to help them to develop and adapt to the new normal. And if that is not appropriate, also help them to move forward and out of the company. You also need a strong people vision built on your values to make sure that you know where to develop and hire, and what to look into when hiring people. So it is a continuous effort when you want to scale people, to invest into enabling them and empowering them and making sure that they really feel appreciated. Last topic here, I think it was really very important in the last years when we all had to suffer through a pandemic, that resilience is key in developing in people. And I always not only want to look into resilience, like making sure that people get through some shock or stresses, but I rather like to look into anti-fragility, which means that you improve and learn from these stresses and shock. And this is something that we try to drive in our people and be good examples for. So talking about examples, when you're looking at people, you also need to start with yourself. So as a leader of change, is it probably the case that you start becoming the bottleneck for growth and scaling the organization? So I think it is key to let go and also invest a bit into self-care and self-compassion, because you can only be compassionate and empathetic with your people if you do the same for yourself. You need to step out of things. You need to empower and enable people, because then you can sit back and relax. Now, overall, I think driving change is always finding balance, because when you start change, you set the pendulum in motion. And it will swing to one or the other of extremes. And this is okay for a specific amount of time. It needs calibration. It needs something that you need to be aware of. And we are willing to tolerate these imbalances, but only for a very short amount of time, because it really creates pain in the organization. And it requires a lot of trust from the organization towards leadership that this is in fact the right way to go. And it requires a good navigation, good communication throughout the whole company to navigate this swimming of the pendulum. Now, let me finish with a brief look into the future. So we moved from startup to grown-up at eyeo, but there's one thing that we definitely don't want to stop doing. We want to keep on disrupting. But beware. With growth, there comes the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And these are complacency, bureaucracy, mistrust, and timidity. But what you can do against them is setting ambitious goals. And this is ours. So next at eyeo is that we want to achieve 1 billion profitable, acceptable ads users. And for us, this is just the next major milestone to, in the end, achieve our vision of putting you, all of the stakeholders of the online ecosystem, in control of a fair and prosperous internet. Now, let me wrap this up. 3 takeaways. 1, growth will come with pain. So you need to build for scale. You need to enable the organization to embrace change. And you need to allow people to grow with the company. And with that, you can sit back and enjoy the ride. So thanks for listening. And now I'm looking forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. We have 3 minutes. Which questions do you have?
I think there was one.
Yes,
Yeah,
there's
okay.
one. But you can come up to the microphone, please, so that everyone can hear you.
Hello, I'm Chris. I'm a product tribe lead, and you mentioned that it's really important, especially when onboarding new people, that they know whom to ask. And I'm questioning, so how are you actually doing it? So can you make that a bit more concrete?
Yeah, I think probably I didn't get this point too well across, because my intention was to not make sure that people need to know who to ask. I want to put good processes in place where it's completely clear what to do to get something done. Like, for example, we are working with Jira and Confluence in the company, and for any process like like procurement, for example, or asking for something at IT ops. You find on Confluence just a major landing page, and there's a big button, click here, and you get moved over to Jira, where you can file the ticket, and then the process happens in a black box, and you don't need to know or understand the process. You don't need to know who's working on them, because this can change over time. It's important to get this out of specific people and move this into a proper process that everybody can understand.
Thank you very much.
Okay, I think there was one more question, right? Yeah. Okay, we have time for this one, and then I send you to lunch.
First of all, thank you. Obviously, this takes a lot of time for everyone involved in the whole process, so it's a very evolutionary process you got there going. Do you have any estimate, let's say, overall levels, how much time people spend on these internal processes you got going, and what do you think is a healthy ratio for this one?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because with all of the change that we drove in the last year, we also wanted to make sure that our business goals don't get out of focus. And one thing that we do is that we have specialists in the company for that. We have one, what we call the foundation services, which is called organizational support. So we have people who are mandated on focusing on exactly that. So when we, for example, introduced the OKR process and the OKR framework, we had our own people, like the agile coaches, for example, who were able to train the rest of the company. And they didn't need to do this beside their normal work, but it is their normal work. And I think this is highly useful in that regard. The other thing is time boxing. So for the last move in our organizational restructuring efforts, we set aside a specific amount of time and made sure that it doesn't have to be perfect in the end, but that this is a good basis then to iterate. So getting something like an MVP, also an organizational design, started, and then let's see that we learn from it. And I think with that we are able to move the amount of work that gets put into these changes, keeps at a level that at least we are able to cope with.
Okay. I feel we were a bit low in welcoming Jutta, so please, let's honor her time and work and input. Thank you so much.
Thank you.